One.
So just to be explicit about things, these are actually some supplementary videos that I'm making after doing the first set on some key words, key terms that are good to keep in mind, develop, keep using, think about as we look into reasoning and practice our reasoning skills and our analytic skills when it comes to looking at arguments. There are a few terms that I thought I left out, and that I don't think there's a rule that you have to define every term that you use as a teacher or as a student. That would be kind of tiresome. I can use the word logic with you, and we all more or less know what I mean. We could have dispensed with this whole introductory part of the course, but I think that it's good to talk about words, not only because we want to get a better grasp of what people mean by them and what we mean by them when we use them, but that I want to encourage you to use them confidently in your work and in your life. I mean, truth is that we can actually get smarter about things by doing this kind of work. And one of the words that I realized I hadn't sort of dwelled on was the word logic, which is a key word. Now, this is not a course in formal logic. That would be quite a different course. Courses like these, this one is called critical reasoning. Usually it's actually called critical thinking. They used to be called informal logic courses when they first began to be taught in America in the 1970s. Pretty much, they were usually called informal logic or practical logic, as opposed to formal logic, which is a whole field unto itself and is really much more like mathematics than the kind of thing that we're going to do. It's fascinating. Of course, it has great relevance to what we're doing, but it's not what we're doing. This is not a course in formal logic. This is a course in reasoning. You might call it practical reasoning, but logic is everywhere, and it's okay to use the word logic in an informal sense, or use the word logic without it referring to formal deductive logic. Logic is if we just look at the word, it's similar to the word history, or it has a range of meanings, but it has this interesting double meaning. We think of the word history, we could be referring to either the events of the past themselves, or we could be referring to the study of the events of the past. That is, history could mean studying, as in being a historian, the study of things that have happened in the past. Or we could be using the word to actually refer to those events themselves. The same goes for logic. By logic, we could refer to the study of the rules of reasoning. Here, that is in this quote here from another source, a book on logic, a definition of logic, but it says logic is concerned with the rules of valid inference. Reference there is to logic as a study, as a field of study. So logic is, I think that's good there. It's concerned with the rules of valid inference. But we also talk about the logic of something, the logic of an argument. We talk about reasoning itself, reasons that are given. So it still has that sort of double meaning. So what is it? How can we use this word? How should we use this word? What does it mean? I don't know. I guess you pick things up along the way. And here, the rules of valid inference. We already have talked about that word. But there's another word. It's just sort of like the companion word to inference. And I felt bad leaving it out because it's so important, and that's the word implication. You might say that logic is so much about implication. and it's about inference too. But again, what is the difference between an implication and an inference? Well, let's give an example here. Implication. Just say that Jane likes Joe. Simple, Jane likes Joe. That's more like Tarzan. Jane likes Joe. That is a very simple, very crude, basic, simple statement, but it has implications. That is, things that we can say on the basis of that statement. For instance, that one of the implications is that Jane likes something. That is, because we know, or we stipulate, that Jane likes Joe. Let's just say that we know that Jane likes Joe. Then we also know other things. For instance, that Jane likes something. Or that Jane is capable of liking. To be a little maybe far out about it. I mean, that is, but the idea is that the first statement implies the second and the third. That this statement here, or let's call it second statement, and the third statement are implied by the first statement, or that the second statement and the third statement are implications of the first statement. So an implication is something that we think is true because we think that something else is true. You might say that the first statement is like the source statement, and it's pregnant. The first statement is pregnant with a bunch of other statements. That is, it implies the truth of all sorts of other things. And maybe the second and third statement are kind of weird statements, but they do seem to be implied by the first statement. So statements imply other statements. We could, of course, also say that the second and third statements are conclusions that we infer on the basis of the first statement, and that shows us, or begins to show us, the relation between the word implication and inference. They're often used incorrectly. For instance, we might say incorrectly that the second and third statement here are inferred by the first statement. That would just be incorrect usage. Statements don't infer anything. Statements do imply other statements, but an inference is something that you and I make. An inference is a mental act, you might say, a step of reasoning that a thinking creature makes. A statement can't infer another statement. A statement implies another statement. If we can say that implication is true on the basis of the first statement. That is, if it's true that Jane likes Joe, then it must be true that Jane likes something, and that Jane is capable of liking. If we assume the truth of the first statement, that Jane likes Joe. Those are valid inferences that we can make, but we make them, right? So an inference is something that is, it's a result of inferring, and inferring is an act that you and I engage in, whereas, of course, a statement is a linguistic entity that can't think. We can think about a statement, but a statement can't think. So, but we say that a statement implies another statement when it can be, we can say on the basis of the first statement that the second statement is true. It's one of the first statement's implications. So, that's a way to get started here. We need to go back to logic, I think, talk more about what the word logic means, but it's very, very closely related with these two words here, inference and implication.